Moments of conflict and argumentation in the Bible are plenteous. When heads butt and people's opinions collide, that's the rocket fuel of the story of God and God's people. It's how things move forward. It's how we propel ourselves onward as we read. We need conflict in our holy texts to better understand what's at stake, why it's important, and what to pay attention to. Now, if you're a conflict-avoidant type, like a lot of people are, like some clergy are, like a lot of Midwesterners are, if you prefer a quieter, maybe a more passive approach, then you might be too busy avoiding it to hear it, but a productive argument can be more beautiful than a Mozart sonata. It's just pitched up communication, where we have to learn how to listen and participate calmly without flipping out. We have to learn how to stick to the issue and not go into personal attack mode. Two people who care about each other can disagree charitably, and they can do more with a good, nonviolent confrontation in 10 minutes than they can with a week of just silently judging each other until the resentment subsides. Today, with Jesus and Peter, we're steering into the problem of the argument rather than swerving around it. Let's see if we can reduce their argument into its simplest terms. Jesus says, "What are people saying about me? Who do they identify me with or as?" Peter says, "They're saying you're a big deal in the mold of John the Baptist, Elijah, a prophet, basically." Jesus says, "Well, but what do all of you in this cohort think?" Peter says, "Well, I say there's only one concept that really works here. You're the Christ, the anointed one, the Messiah." This is a big deal. They understand it probably brings everything around them to a halt. And without admitting anything, Jesus passionately orders everyone in the group that they are not to say anything about this to anyone. So what is Peter thinking? We don't know, but sure, Jesus just shut him down, but he didn't tell him he was wrong, did he? About the whole Messiah business, he just said, don't talk about it. If it's true, it could mean they've been told to keep the biggest secret in history. And if Peter was somehow right just now, if by chance he'd fallen backwards into it, or maybe he'd been thinking about it for a while but was too scared to say, regardless, if it was true, it would eventually come to light and it would change everything forever. And Jesus then launches into a description of what he knows is awaiting him in the future. And for those listening, it's a wild scenario about being persecuted and killed, and then somehow, after 3 days, not being dead anymore. Strange, yes. But see, for Peter, it rings a bell because it quietly violates his sense of the conversation they've just had. Because no anointed one, no Christ, no Messiah should have to live with the knowledge of their own persecution and death. Something should be able to be done about that. That's not how you treat a king. The whole thing could surely be avoided. Something isn't right. So out of care and concern, he steers Jesus away from the rest of the group, and he quietly proceeds to dress him down. Now, if it wasn't already uncomfortable, it certainly is now. cheeks flushed, ears red, voices hushed with intensity. Peter says, Jesus, what is your deal? You claim to be anointed by God, or at least you don't say no when I put the label on you. Well, the Messiah doesn't get killed. You don't kill the king. Kings are sovereign. They rule. They're not weak like that. What's the matter with you? The text is careful to say here that it's upon seeing the other disciples that Jesus responds to Peter. This is to be a group memo. Reply all, and maybe we won't have to keep doing this. Get behind me, Satan. That is, accuser, adversary, tempter, antagonist, Satan. Your mind is in the material world where kings are all about horses and chariots and swords and spears, principalities and powers. It is time to reprioritize and start seeing things from the perspective of heaven. It is time to ask if the title of king really is appropriate, then king of what exactly? Peter, my reality and your aspirations are miles apart. We need to do something about that. We need to get on the same page. King James Version is hard to resist here. Get thee behind me, Satan, Jesus says, and we've all heard that. But then he adds, thou savorest not the things that be of God, but the things that be of men. If all this upbraiding isn't enough to convince Peter, perhaps it is useful for us to remember that in just 6 days he will ascend the mountain with Jesus and James and John, and Jesus will show them precisely who he is as he beats back the night with a moment of heavenly light. And Peter will declare in one meaning-packed sentence that it is good for them to be there. For now, though, the conflict has just been between Peter and Jesus, and then spoken to by Jesus for the benefit of the closest followers of his. But now, in this moment, it's poured out like an offering for the ears of any who might hear. He calls in the crowd together so that they can hear along with the disciples, and he lays it out for them straight and plain. And not as passive aggression. In fact, for Jesus, that argument with Peter is now over with. He announces in so many words that in his kingdom, our earthly expectations are going to get upended. That whatever we think it is that gives us power, pleasure, sense of happiness or privilege will only be as fleeting and insubstantial as a breath on the wind. That following him will cause a price to be enacted upon their very lives. But that finally the view from heaven will fully come on earth and prevail over the kingdoms of men. And that those who once lost their lives will take them up again. Great mystery. And that mystery of resurrection, that is not only for himself, that is for all in the kingdom. Otherwise, what good is it to gain the world but lose your soul? So what do we do with all this arguing today? When the kingdoms of earth seem so tenuous, And all our conflicts are still about having power and holding power. What do we do with something like this when our most important and public fights don't appear to be getting us anywhere? When the art of civil and productive dialogue seems like a relic of the past? Where is the view from heaven? I'm both overjoyed and scared to report that the answer lies within us already. Peter's question is basically this: hey, if you really are the Messiah and you're not the kind of king we're thinking of, then just tell us what your kingdom is, so we'll at least know it when we see it. And that's why Jesus' answer to the whole crowd is so frightening, because his kingdom is the kingdom where everyone bears their own cross. There's no easy out, there's no easy answer, there's no slide to the top. He tells us that if we want to remake the world according to his value system, then it will be marked by tolerance, prayer, peace, wisdom, justice, beauty, and by the kind of conflict that is good and productive and life-affirming. But that when we see these things and we know that his kingdom has come near, we may only be seeing them because we have helped to bring them into existence. It will require much in the way of cross-bearing. So pray this day to be able to name your own cross with great clarity and to shoulder it with dignity, and then leave this place prepared to follow Christ wherever he leads you. Amen.